Hello guys, it's Christian from YGO Nordic. Today I'm bringing you a co-deck list here with top 16 of the Invitational, top 16 player Ingvar Hjartarson. Me and Ingvar worked on the deck together, and I initially showed him the idea, but I will be the one presenting the deck because my audio and video quality is a little bit better than Ingvar's setup. So yeah, please enjoy the deck profile. So we'll just get started. So we played 2 Skomata, 2 Wendy. So these are like the access to your Shaddolls. Then we played a Beast and a Hog. These are like your plus cards in terms of resources. And then we played a Dragon and an Aerial, and these are like to deal with the opponent's stuff. Dragon popping stuff and Aerial banishing 3. So we played 8 Shaddolls, and we played 3 Shaddoll Fusion. And of course the best card in the entire archetype, the Shaddoll Schism. And this card is so crazy. Outs Dragoon. If you have Meltdown up, means combo decks can't play. Means you can very reliably just go first. It's a very nice card. Do you have anything to add, Ingvar?
Yeah, something nice by playing so many diverse Shaddolls is that, for fact, Cologne, when it's sent to the graveyard, it can add either from the deck or a grave. So you can actually add Ariel back and then just send it again with Cologne and trigger it again in a later turn.
Yes.
So you can banish up to 6 cards against some matchups.
Yeah, so against something like Eldritch, if they only play 2 Lord, that can be very relevant. And I agree, like the recyclability of the utility cards means that you can also sort of get away with not playing as many because you have so much access to Cologne, in part due to this card.
Precisely.
So, I'll touch a little bit on the fusion ratio at the end. I felt like the deck only had like 2 flex spots, and honestly, moving forward, I would play 2L Shaddoll Fusion and keep the Shaddoll monster ratio as is. I did some math to sort of show how often you would open up the fusion combo with access to your Shaddolls, and essentially adding 2 more fusion spells at this ratio meant that you increased your consistency to the point where adding a 3rd fusion spell or an additional monster was equal. So I felt like that's sort of the equilibrium for the deck. So I would play 2L, and I'll tell you what I would cut personally later. So for the Dogmatika part of the deck, we played, of course, 3 Nadir Servant. Honestly, this is the only reason to play the Dogmatikas, almost. There's a little bit of natural synergy outside of this card, but I think if there were no Dogmatika cards, I would still play this because it's just so good. Then we played the Ecclesia, the Searcher, and the Fleur-de-Lis. This was nice because it meant going second. It was a better target than the Punishment, obviously. This could help OTK. This could negate Dragoon. So it meant like we went from having like a decent amount of Dragoon outs in the main, but then we increased it by 4 just by adding 1 card. Also, a lot of people say that Punishment is like a play starter in the deck, and while that is true, I think people forget, like what I'm referring to is some people play like this and some people play like this. But what some people forget is that Fleur is both a light monster, so it increases consistency by being a fusion material in your hand. But it also increases consistency if specifically you open like 1 Shaddoll, Alistair, and Fleur in your hand. So because it gives you access to Anaconda sending Shaddoll Fusion and then getting the play started that way. So I think a lot of people neglect the fact that Fleur actually has some natural synergy with the deck as well as Punishment. Do you have anything to add, Ingvar?
Yes, and generally it was pretty nice to have the flexibility choose between adding either Fleur-de-Lis or Punishment.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, as mentioned, well, it can differ while going first and second, but in general, like having the option to search Punishment also as a discard fodder for Megabar against trap decks, or adding Fleur-de-Lis as the specific monster to pitch off for Megabar is also nice.
Yeah, I agree. Although I will say that this is one of the cards that I have cut for an extra L. Personally, I just think the the cost or the downfall of activating this card is just too large to justify it. Like, it is fine, but it's probably the card that I would first cut in the deck, maybe outside of Foolish Burial, personally. Do you agree with that sentiment, Ingvar? Do you think that card is like completely mandatory to play, or do you also think that it's a card that can be cut in theory?
I often do see the downside being a downside
Yeah.
for not being able to play for a turn somewhat, even though it can disrupt and supply, for example, Schism through App Cologne.
Yeah. Well, I agree. It does have its upsides, but again, we don't want to play above 40, so you do have to sort of prioritize a little bit, and it is the first card I would cut personally. For the Invoked engine, we played 3 Alistair and 3 Meltdown, so 6 Alistair axes, and then 2 Invocation. Now, I think this ratio was pretty correct. We're playing 6 normal summons essentially. If Droll wasn't in the format, I would cut one of the Alistairs and play it as a terraforming, because the main reason we're playing this is, outside of giving us grind, it also gives us Meltdown. And Meltdown is a really, really good card in this deck, because if you resolve Meltdown, all negates die against your fusion spells. You gain priority each time you send stuff to the grave for fusioning with Shaddoll fusion. So for example, you can, like, if you're going second, you can App Cologne, you can negate stuff, and they can't do anything about it. And same with Dragon, popping back row without them being able to chain is just amazing. And then, just 2 Invocation, because I would rather supply the fusion spells elsewhere. 3 felt like it was a little bit too much, although you could definitely justify playing 3 in my opinion. Do you have anything to add, Ingvar?
Yes. For to defend why only playing 6 Alistair axes instead of 7 for adding terraforming is that, as you can see, with Extravagance, it adds that often...
you mean Prosperity?
Prosperity, sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Adds often the last piece, and you often do not want to see too many Alistair in your hands, and you can survive without it, as it somewhat often just works as a fusion spell axis.
Yeah, it's definitely a supplementary engine to the deck. I agree with
Precisely. That. And the 2 Invocation is somewhat the most fitting, since you can view as Shaddoll fusion and your Nadir Servant as somewhat also as a fusion axis cards.
Yeah, indeed.
So
we are actually playing 8 cards that gain value off Shaddolls in the hand, which is a pretty correct ratio in general. And
actually, if you calculate to the Alistairs as a fusion and then card 2, then it's precisely.
However, I've actually stopped doing that, because when I see the Alistair, I would like to have the Invocation to get the value of the Alistair. But I do agree with the sentiment that you can completely view him as a fusion spell.
Yeah, that's the good part. It works both ways.
Yes, indeed. Now, I guess this section of the deck, so we've done Shaddolls, we've done the Dogmatika part and the Invoke part. So this I would call like our consistency utility stuff. Now I'm gonna be a little bit greedy and take a little bit of credit for this tech, the Prosperities, and we also play 1 Foolish. When I read this card, I instantly knew I had to go and buy Starlights of it because of how good it is in this deck. This deck is a 2 to 3 card combo deck that wants to see multiple engines to play, essentially. So this card being in the deck meant that you could cut down a lot of the awkward ratios in the deck. And honestly, this card is amazing. However, I would say you would never banish more than 3 with this unless you're really greedy like Ingvar, but I would not recommend it. And then the Foolish just being access to all the Shaddolls. But this is also the card that I would cut for the second El Shaddoll, as I mentioned earlier. But yeah, what are you thinking, Ingvar? Do you agree this card was amazing?
Yes, so Prosperity was kind of the savior to each hand, where you often lacked just one piece, the final piece to completing the combinations. For if you're lacking,
like seeing
for example,
the 2 card, 3 card combos and different engines.
Yeah, and especially for decks like a fusion deck where you require your fusion spell and your fusion materials, the option Prosperity gives you just fixes those problems.
Yeah, and I agree with that sentiment, but I think it's even better because it's not just the typical, it's also the same problem trap decks have. If they're playing traps and monsters, they see all traps or all monsters and then they lose. It's that same mentality, but we also just play so many power cards, and also we side for going second in some matchups. So this allows you to see your side so much more often. And in terms of like something compared to something like Extravagance or Desires, they only let you see 2 cards. This lets you see 3 and pick. And I think that the fact that you get to see a 3rd card, you don't necessarily care about the card advantage, but you do really care about the key cards. So I think both not having to deck build around playing Desires, which I was playing previously, but stopped when this came out. I think this card just adds so much flexibility in terms of ratios in the deck, and it's such a huge consistency boost, which is something the deck has definitely lacked in the past, in my opinion.
Totally agree.
Now the last section I'll call counter cards for the meta, so like hand traps and stuff that deals with boards. So we played 3 Super Polymerization. This card is crazy. 3 Nadir Servant and 3 Gamma and
3 Nibiru.
Oh, did I not say Nibiru? That's my mistake.
Yes.
Okay. Well, yes, 3 Super Poly, 3 Nibiru, 3 Gamma, and 1 Driver. Now, if you take note, all of these cards actually have synergy with our engine at the same time as just being very, very good in the meta right now. So like the Super Polys, if you open both Alistair and the Shaddoll monsters, work as like Super Poly targets against a lot of different attributes. Also, we wanted to sort of give Virtual World a really hard time because typically they'll make either 2 VFD or 1 VFD, and we wanted each thing to be wrong. We wanted them to have no way of like playing around this outside of maybe making Gossip Shadow, which for some reason, at least when I've played against it, they do quite rarely. So we wanted to just save the Gamma for the draw phase. When they shotgun it, Gamma them. If they only made 1 VFD, they would lose. But if they made 2 VFD, we would hope to have the Super Poly out into a Starving Venom. And then Virtual World is quite a hot matchup for this deck, so we also chose to play probably the best hand trap against that deck, which is the Nibiru's. And it just works really nicely because you can also like set a doll, set this, and trigger the doll on their turn. If you get Sexel locked, for example, you can like set this, set a doll. When they go end phase with their Sexel on board, you can like Super Poly it into a construct and win typically. Unless you're like me and you're round 2, game 3, and you go 3 turns without seeing a Shaddoll while this is dead in your hand. That was fun. And yeah, these are also light, so they act as fusion material. So these actually, unlike other decks where hand traps lower your consistency, these sort of indirectly boost it, which is really nice. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and just viewing the cards and their impact on just other meta decks and tier 2 and even Rogue is quite significant. Also, the option with Super Poly being you can send it with Anaconda, where especially where with Anaconda's second effect, you can target one monster and change it to dark. You can almost then Super Poly with anything.
Yeah, so like the fact that getting 2 monsters on board now deals with basically any boss monster in the game and gives you a big beat stick. I agree is like really key. So yeah, it's sort of like playing Cerberus but on steroids. It's really crazy.
And I actually always enjoy drawing the hand traps, because they're light. So I could, when I had the options to fusion, it would be boring to just make Winter and pass.
Yeah.
But if I have the option to make Construct, I can send Shaddoll Schism, then link away the Construct and get Schism to have access to that.
Yeah, so it sort of gets you through the start of the game directly into the like resources for the mid game, which I also liked. And also another comment I wanted to make is playing Gamma and Driver in this deck, especially in like a format where Droll and Ash are both quite prevalent. They sort of act like 3 Called by the Graves that also like get you monsters on the field. However, we did not play anything that specifically capitalized on getting these on board, which is maybe something you could remedy in the future. But yeah, just having 3 Called by the Graves for a deck that like, it's sort of like Dragon Link, right? We don't commit a lot of monsters to the field before our power plays start going in at least the bad hands, where you like have to go Shaddoll Fusion and then they Ash, or if you go Nadir Servant they Ash, or if you go Prosperity they Ash, they just get punished pretty hard. And these still work as fusion material from the field. So if you're doing Shaddoll Fusion, you just get a light monster for free, and you can make Anaconda with the construct that you're making, and make Verde. And then like maybe do another Shaddoll Fusion, things like that. So I think all these cards were really key, and I would not cut any of them currently. Also, I think that it's sort of the 10 like hand traps / counter cards is sort of where the deck starts losing too much consistency if you increase it, which is also why we did not main the Ash Blossom. But yeah, we can talk more about that soon. But let's do the extra deck. So we played 6 Shaddolls, we played 2 Construct, 2 Apkalone, and 2 Wendy. Honestly, some people play 3 Constructs. A lot of people swear by it. I typically never need the third. For me, the third one was typically getting banished off Prosperity anyway, so I would rather play an extra deck monster that had some kind of utility, as opposed to just being banished fodder, so it could come up sometimes. We played also 2 Megabar and an Algoidius, 1 Verte, 1 Artemis, 1 Gravity Controller, and 1 Starving Venom. So I would say all of these cards are pretty mandatory. And then the last 2 cards I would sort of call the flex spots of the deck were 1 Entis and 1 Ragin. So Entis was nice because because of punishment, but also sometimes if you're like late game with Nadir Servant, this can be pretty nice to send. And then Ragin was a nice super poly target for like the bird deck, or getting rid of like Shen Shen in the virtual world matchup. Do you have anything to add to the extra deck, Ingvar?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Something a lot of people forget is that Apkalone actually has an effect when it hits on the field. And that is to permanently negate something.
Yeah.
Which people totally ignored.
Yeah, a lot of people forget that it's not until the end of the turn, because so many effect negations are, but it's actually permanent. So this card is also really good against like control or like back row decks.
Yeah, so it can also kind of justify for the not needing the extra construct, because all the fusion monsters are very good while summoned.
Yeah. Now let's move on to the side, because this is sort of starting to become a very long profile, but we are also going very much in depth, which I hope you guys appreciate. So for the side, we played 3 Ash. This was like mainly for just matchups where Nibiru was bad, because Nibiru is not super generic. So it was nice to have something to just side in and out that was quite easy. But it was also for specifically for the virtual world matchup, which this deck struggles with. And I think hitting the consistency is sort of the way to really get at that deck, unless you're playing Shaddolls with super polys and gammas and stuff. We also played 3 Ruler. We were sort of on Droll at first, and then I think I suggested playing this card instead, because Drytron has about a 30 to 40% chance of just opening and out to Droll anyway. And our deck could sort of play through them getting access to the orange lights in their hand anyway. So having a card that just worked 100% of the time seemed a lot better than a card that worked 60% of the time. While it's also more generic, because all combo decks are sort of hit by this card, whereas not all combo decks are hit by Droll. And we had a little bit of issue having enough space in the side deck. We also played 3 Torrential. The idea was with this was actually just I wanted to find another card that was good going second against Virtual World, and then I landed on Torrential because I thought everything else outside of like consistency hits was kind of subpar. So I wanted another blowout, and Torrential was the card that came to mind. And I think both going first and second, this card was really good against that matchup, or is really good against that matchup. But this also is really good siding in going first in most matchups that are like mid-range or combo, because you can clear a lot of resources with it, and it triggers the Shaddolls and everything. So that's really nice. And then the last 6 cards is sort of embodying our strategy against back row decks. So we played 3 Lightning Storm, 1 Duster, and 2 evenly matched. The idea was that if we, like, our deck doesn't do a whole lot against trap decks going first, so we just let them start, have the extra card in hand, so drawing 6 cards, more chance to see one of these, and then while also playing 3 Prosperity in the main, it just seemed to make sense to go second, because even against something like Guru, which has an inherent negate in the deck that they can search, going second, you would still have a pretty okay chance of seeing 2 of these cards, which could just end the game. Do you have anything you'd like to talk about in the side deck?
Yes. Regarding Ash Blossom,
Yeah.
why we chose not to main deck it was because we found it as kind of a low impact card.
Yeah.
As a standalone hand trap, or within a deck, if it was consisting of low amount of hand traps, then Ash by itself does not do much. But the flexibility of it in the side, like you mentioned, by taking Nibiru out against control decks, was a very nice addition.
Yeah, I completely agree. So yeah, I think the card was really nice in the side deck, but again, I would say maining it, you sort of start to push the consistency of the deck too much if you wanted to increase your like hand trap ratio. So I think I would leave it here for now, but we'll see what happens after the ban list. It's going to be wild. But anyway, this has been going on for quite a while, so I think I will cut the deck profile here. So I would just like to say thank you everyone for watching. And Ingvar, do you have anything you'd like to say here at the end? Any shout-outs or anything like that?
Yes, I would actually want to shout out to the people who borrowed me cards.
Sure.
That would be Christian Forstman, Anton Hjulon, and Oscar Leia.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No.
Okay, perfect. Well, I would say thank you for showing us your deck, but it's our deck. But thank you for participating in this deck profile, and I'll see everyone in the next video.